Thank you to everyone involved with today's MakerFest. Our first presenter of the day is Alyssa Lange with Playful Preschool STEM, 3 tips to support young learners every day. Alyssa is an associate professor of early childhood education at East Tennessee State University. Her 3 tips will show how to build a growth mindset for children learning STEM concepts. A live Q&A will follow.
Now from East Tennessee State University, Dr. Alyssa Lange, Associate Professor and Director of the Early Childhood STEM Lab, will present Playful Preschool STEM, 3 tips to support young learners every day.
Hello, welcome to my talk entitled Playful Preschool STEM, 3 tips to support young learners every day. My name is Alyssa Lange, and I am an Associate Professor of Early Childhood Education at East Tennessee State University. I am also the Director of the Early Childhood STEM Lab here at ETSU. Before I get started, I just have to thank a couple people for their role on the work that I have been doing and many others. First, the National Institute for Early Education Research, where the SciMath DLL project began and was substantially developed. Former principal investigator Kim Brenneman and many, many others who have worked with us over the last, 10 years to create professional learning resources around STEM for preschool educators. And thanks, lots of thanks, many thanks to the National Science Foundation for the funding. So I am, as I mentioned, interested in professional learning for preschool STEM. We recently came out with a book, Teaching STEM in the Preschool Classroom, Big Ideas for 3 to 5-year-olds. And I have 3 young children myself who have been nice enough to let me test out some activities and help me grow as an educator every day. Today I will provide a brief introduction, talk about what is STEM, and then we'll dive into 3 tips. And finally, we will sum up at the end. Okay, so what do you see? When you look at this picture, what do you see? What do you first see? Do you see tools, simple tools? Do you see a boy with screws in his hand? What do you think they're doing? Is this STEM? I want you at the end of this presentation or soon in the future to see the whole world, see your children's whole worlds as opportunities for STEM thinking, learning, and doing. A child might see, or a grown-up might see, 3 screws in his hand, not just the child's holding screws, but 3, that number 3. We are beginning to mathematize our world. Maybe we need those 3 if we're going to try to put this calculator back together again, as we're learning to use this simple tool to take things apart and see how they're put together. I hope for you that you find at least 3 new things to try today. And I'll get to that near the end. And hopefully have some fun. So the 3 tips are read about STEM, test out children's ideas, and find STEM everywhere. And we advocate for the idea that exploring STEM in this way with little children, with young children, with and without disabilities, will prepare them for what's next. And they'll have fun doing it. And thinking about STEM in this way, I hope, will help you think about yourself as a STEM learner and as a supporter of STEM learning in children. So what is early STEM? Well, first, let's say what it isn't. We generally don't think about early STEM, especially preschool and younger, as involving worksheets and drills. Generally, national standards encourage hands-on, minds-on, active learning and less memorization. It's also not too difficult. It's not only for math people, not only for boys. And we don't think it's inappropriate for young children with disabilities. STEM is accessible, and when it's done right, it can be valuable for everyone. So STEM is an acronym for science, technology, engineering, and math, which each have their own histories, right? Science has a long history, science education as well, behind it. But there's also ways in which these domains are connected and help support learning across them, which is why it has been an acronym. And there's a very long report there that you are welcome to read about integrated STEM education as well. When I think about early STEM, I think it's helpful to think about facts or content to learn, as well as practices or processes, things we want kids to be able to do, okay? So in terms of something to learn, we could learn that there is length as an attribute of objects. So these different mouse tails have different lengths. That's something to learn, that something has an attribute of length. But then how do we measure the length? How do we compare lengths? Well, we can learn how to do that. We can learn that fair length measurement requires that if we're going to compare two lengths, requires that you line up two ends of the objects. You line up one end of the two objects to be compared, and then you look at the other side. And it's not fair if the two objects aren't straight or if they're not lined up at one end. So that's a practice. It's an active engagement in the process of measurement. That is something that we can learn in early childhood, as well as this idea that their length is an attribute of objects. We can learn about, in terms of science, that some animals keep warm in the winter in the Arctic Ocean. How do they keep warm? There's really, really wonderful, fun experiences that our team and others have done to get kids hands-on experience what it's like to keep warm from blubber, keeping us warm in cold water. Young children can experience for themselves by keeping track of data, documenting that this plant seems to change every week or every other day. If we keep on tracking it, we can notice that living things grow and change. If they get what they need to survive and thrive, we can learn through hands-on experiences that things grow and change. We can learn the number sequence and we count. And those numbers go in an order. That's something to learn. That's some content. But then how we use them, how we use those numbers then to count objects is a skill. So I think this is just nice. It's a nice way to kind of think about it. Facts to learn and also ways in which we engage with science, math, and STEM. In this case, we can use what we know about measurement, maybe. We're beginning to learn about proper measurement in order to solve a problem about figuring out how far the car's path has traveled after going down the ramp. Why is early STEM important? For lots of reasons, and there are a number of recent reports that talk about the value of early STEM for later learning. Here's one here. There are a couple others. There's also a recent journal article out by the leadership team of the STEMI Center, linked there at the bottom, about the value of STEM for children with disabilities. So let's get into our tips. We kind of have this sense of science, technology, engineering, and math as things to learn, things to be able to do about the world, related to the world around us, very generally speaking. So let's get into it. So tip 1, read about it. So you're generally thinking about the value of reading to young children. We have books in our classrooms, in our homes. There's a lot of research around the value of that. But have you been reading about math in particular, or engineering in the case of The Most Magnificent Thing? The Actual Size book by Steve Jenkins is a lovely way for kids to think about length and size and measurement. Mission to Space is a lovely book about an astronaut and his process to getting into space. So there are some books specifically on STEM content. You may be aware of those. There's some great lists, and the STEMI Center has some lists started too. But there's also STEM in lots of books that we don't think of as STEM books. So this may not be surprising to you, but if you haven't thought about finding math or finding science or thinking about engineering in other books that aren't clearly STEM books, that's what I hope that I'll push you to do. So in The Little Pea We Love, we can talk about physical science and motion of the little pea flying through the air, for example. And here are some of the STEM storybook research that STEMI has started to think about reading with children with disabilities, in particular, and adapting books. Tip 2, test it out. I walk up the stairs, my son still hasn't got his pajamas on, and he's making this giant bubble with the soap from the sink as he's washing his hands. I should be happy he's washing his hands, but he's making this giant bubble. My inclination is to stop him and say, you were supposed to be getting your jammies on, but I'm working really hard to let him test out these ideas. These bubbles are better than the bubble mixture we have, actually. The bubbles from the sink work better. What an interesting idea that he could test out. And children wonder. It's sometimes challenging, but if we let them test out their ideas, even their wild ones, as long as it's safe, you will really see the benefit. We can raise up children's voices, build their persistence, face your fears, face their fears, right? And learning that growth mindset, or mindset for learning, as the Young Mathematician site calls it, related to math. Keep trying even when it's not working, even when you think you're wrong. You tried this, you put crayon shavings and toothpaste to make Play-Doh, and you know what, it didn't work. It wasn't what you wanted. Well, what can we do to change it? We can really help kids persist by facing our own fears and maybe letting go a little bit. So ask yourself some of these questions. Think about your own self as a learner, how you think about STEM for yourself. If you're afraid to be wrong, or your kid's going to be afraid to be wrong, those things really matter for young children, and we can start early, building up their confidence and willingness to try and fail, which is what scientists and engineers do. Tip 3, find it everywhere. So this classroom where this boy was in a preschool classroom in New Jersey, they did number composition, and he starts doing it with his lunch. It's really everywhere. Here's a short video of my daughter in one of the hand washing routines.
5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Let's turn this off while you're... 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Hey, Clem, can you count? Come on. You're going to wash all the soap off. Can you count to 30 just all by yourself? Without going to 10, 10, 10, but can you count all the way to 30? No, 10, 10, 10, 10. How many tens was that? 100 tens. Whoa, that's a lot of tens.
So here's one routine. Credit to my husband for this idea of breaking counting up to 30 into tens for our then 3-year-old. Where else in your day are there opportunities to count, to look for shapes, to talk about attributes, to observe carefully? All over the place, right? Throughout the classroom, across the day in the classroom, not just in math and science time. When you're eating, when you're thinking about setting up for mealtime. Outside are all sorts of opportunities for STEM observations, experiences, explorations, where kids can test out their ideas, right? Scavenger hunts of all sorts, inside and outside, really. Games. Lots of groups are working on really rich math games right now. So here's some examples: puzzles and dice games. Kids who are early in their number development might really benefit from a finding two game. So where your two shoes and your two eyes, just a natural, nice, fun game that you can do with what you already have in your classroom or around the house. And solving a real problem. We really have to fill the water table just to this line. What do you think we should do? How are we going to do that? Involving kids in that process is so powerful. It's a real problem. The garden hose doesn't work in our classroom garden. What can we do? What container should we use to bring the water up? And we wrote about this in this article for Science and Children that is available on our website if you're interested in that. We also wrote a bit in a blog about explorations with wind that kids were interested in. These are engineering, STEM, there's math involved. So where across your day are there opportunities for STEM, integrated STEM or STE or M on their own? STEMie is working on resources to support children with disabilities during various routines of the day. So in this case, here's one draft that they're working on for a mealtime for young kids. And they will be adding more of those as they go. So in sum, I hope that you start with something you're already doing. What are you already doing? Are you already reading some books to your kids? Where's the math in there? Can you use some wonderful geometry terms like rhombus and help kids figure out what a rhombus is? And it's hard sometimes. I get it. This is my daughter saying, "Can I draw you a circle?" And I was trying to work out on the porch, and I said, no, not now. And I stopped and I said, what am I doing? You want to draw a geometric shape? Yes, of course, come back here. Draw me a circle. But life, this is hard, especially right now during the pandemic and everything else that's going on. This is a hard time. So give yourself some credit. Take advantage of what you already have around your home or in your classroom. What are your children's strengths? What are they interested in? And go from there. And you'll do great. You've got what it takes to support your young learners moving forward. I hope you can try 1, maybe 3 new things. Grab that book you've never thought of as a STEM book and see if you can find some math vocabulary. Let them test out something you haven't usually said yes to, if it's safe. And really find STEM everywhere, from your blanket fort to your mealtime. And if this is interesting to you, please find out more. There's all sorts of wonderful resources and people working at the STEMI Center and as a part of this virtual conference. I have a blog coming out that's related to this presentation, geared toward families in particular. We also have a STEM book as well, if that's of interest. So please do reach out. We also have a newsletter for EC STEM Lab. That's free. It comes about once every 2 months or so. And if I don't answer your questions today, please send me an email. I'm happy to chat early childhood STEM anytime. Thanks so much.
It's time for Q&A. Dr. Alyssa Lange, Associate Professor and Director of the Early Childhood STEM Lab at East Tennessee State University, will answer questions about her presentation, Playful Preschool STEM, 3 Tips to Support Young Learners Every Day. Dr. Ann Sam is the moderator.
Hello, everyone. And Alyssa, that was a great presentation. And I really enjoyed hearing those really specific things that we can do in our everyday routines in life to really encourage STEM, both the STEM overall and as well as focusing on the S, T, E, and M individually. And I really liked your statement about raising up our children's voices and really listening to them. So thank you for the presentation. So we have our first question, Alyssa, is related to, you were talking about the term fair within your presentation. And this person is wondering, how can we keep using EC terms, early childhood terms, and what vocabulary is best to use in these situations?
Early childhood terms, are you talking about the fairness in terms of fair measurement?
Yes, I think so. And so maybe perhaps other terms like that you might want to use in early childhood settings.
Ooh, interesting question. I find STEM terms a really interesting topic. So for young children, you'll often hear them use some terms that are not the formal terms. They're using more informal terms to refer to their understanding of certain concepts or what they tend to do. That doesn't mean, but that's not necessarily wrong, right? What we want to do is support accurate use of terms. And so fairness is something that young children absolutely can connect with, right? Wait, why did my brother get more crackers than I did? That's not fair. So in terms of thinking about using terms that are at the right level for your children, that's very, very wise for sure. But that doesn't mean you can't use accurate and more formal terms either. So there's a nice example as we're learning the attributes of two-dimensional shapes. One of the key attributes of shapes like quadrilaterals are that they have corners, right? They have 4 corners and 4 sides. You can begin to talk about the angles, which is a little bit more advanced for kids. So is saying that it has 4 points wrong? It's not necessarily wrong, right? It's just not yet moved to that formal mathematical terminology yet. But that's part of what kids will learn as they get older and as a part of their schooling experience is to move from the informal terms to the formal, in that case, geometrical terms. But the same thing is true for science and STEM as well. And so I think the difference is you want it to be accurate, right? Accurate and appropriate for their ages and for their abilities that will support their learning, as opposed to inaccurate, right? Like that classic example of the pizza slice is a triangle. Well, it's not actually, right? That's actually not quite accurate. Well, can we talk about what is accurate? It's like a triangle, and now we're going to move them toward a more formal and accurate understanding of concepts. I hope that helps.
I think it did. She says she loves your answer. So perfect. Laura asks, how do you engage virtual learners with STEM, especially when you don't know exactly what materials they might have at home?
That's a tough one, really tough one. And it's a question lots of us, lots of researchers and educators are facing right now, of course, with a lot of young learners being at home. And I'm not sure there's one good answer, and I think my first part of my answer would be, it really depends on the age of the kids, right? Something that works for a 5-year-old is going to be different, very different from something that works for a 3rd grader or even someone younger than 5 years old, right? So there are a number of online sources right now that are really strong. And so sort of starting from a place of, I know this is a research-based resource. I mean, Khan Academy Kids comes to mind. My young children really like that. They have a free app. And I just think it's a great example of, thoroughly researched and engaging online content for young children. And there are others out there. So that would kind of be the place I would start is there a resource that we know is high quality? And then it just really varies. And, we're talking about children with special needs here too. So that's a whole nother layer of individualization to pay attention to.
Well, I appreciate the recommendation for good, high quality sources that are out there that we can look at, because I know that's something I struggle with even as a parent, of where to look and what do we know is good. So the Khan Academy was a great recommendation. Our next question is, if the STEM book activities for preschool that you mentioned would also be applicable to kindergarten students?
STEM book?
Your book that you were talking about.
Good question. So the idea of finding books that have a STEM focus and also finding STEM in books. I
think also the book that you wrote for STEM.
Our book.
Yes, your book, if that one would be applicable to kindergarten students.
It would be. I think it would be. It's definitely, we wrote it with preschool educators in mind, as that's the grade and the age of children that we've been working the most with and teachers that we've been working the most with. So the examples are from preschool classrooms. The content is more broad for sure, in terms of applying to a broader range of ages than just preschool.
Okay, great. So Helen really liked your presentation, Alyssa, but she wonders what happens if a child can't figure out something. What about discouragement or a feeling of disappointment or being unsuccessful?
Great question. And these are very normal feelings that we all have and young children absolutely have. And so I think that really connects to that second point about letting kids test out their ideas. So it matters how we support their ideas, right? So if we say, how do you think we can wipe up this spill? And they say, hopefully not my shirt, but that's what my kids would say. If they say we can use this tinfoil, and it's, then in our response that they start to build an awareness that it's okay to be wrong when they try something that doesn't work. So if I say, let's try that, I kind of have a feeling it's probably not going to be very, not have good absorption, that particular material, but I let them try it anyway. Now here's this opportunity. When it doesn't work, what's my response as the educator or the parent? What's the child's response? Sometimes they're just going to feel disappointed. And so at that point, it can be really beneficial just to hear them. I hear that you sound really disappointed by that, but I'm really proud of you for trying. I'm really proud that you came up with your own idea and tried it. And it's not going to change in one time. This is a lifelong process, but it really starts early. The sense that it's okay to try my ideas have value, and it's okay if they don't work out.
Thanks, Alyssa. This next person would like to know how you personally think we can promote gender equality within children for the STEM field.
Interesting question. And there is certainly a gap in terms of gender representations in STEM fields later on. One of my doctoral students is actually working on a early math and spatial awareness study, and whether these differences in the way that children perceive their math abilities starts as early as 3 and 4 years old. And so if it does, and some research would suggest that some of those sort of senses of themselves, their perception of themselves as a capable mathematician, if it starts that early, then that's really critical then to support the grown-ups in these children's lives to, number one, be aware of that what we're teaching them these things really, really early on, and then provide supports, right? It's one thing to know that differences in their perceptions of their own skills and self-efficacy starts early, but how do you support equity then early on? How do you give all children the same opportunities, support them equally? There's some fascinating work on the way that we talk, the parents talk to boys and girls is even different. Susan Levine, I believe her people in Illinois have done some work with families and puzzles, and parents give feedback to boys that's more about the strategies that they use in doing the puzzles, the same puzzles, right? Whereas for girls, the feedback that kids are given is much more like, oh, good job, much more sort of positive like that, but not focused on the procedures that they're doing and the structures and the spatial changes in the puzzles pieces. So that's really powerful. If already, at 3 and 4 years old, educators and families are giving different feedback to boys versus girls. So I think for me, being in early childhood, of course, I believe it starts early, and first knowing what those differences are and then supporting educators and families to be aware of that and give some tips about what to do is a great start.
Yeah, thanks. I hear a common theme that you've had in all of your answers, I think, so far, Alyssa, is the importance of starting early in what we're doing for our children related to STEM. Annie asked, how do you do a STEM activity with 2 children of different ages? So, for example, a preschooler and a baby. If the baby is trying to put things in her mouth or trying to take down the structure that the preschooler is building, are there specific tips to engage both children?
Good question. I'm not an infant and toddler expert, but what I know of that age group is that so many foundations for later STEM thinking and learning and doing are being laid at that age. And so kind of similar to older children, I think, first of all, knowing that what they're doing are some foundations for STEM, right? We think of them as maybe making a mess or, right, just kind of what babies do or something. Actually, when you're putting that ball in the tube, that's actually testing a theory. And you're repeating that over and over, and you're learning something that's going to be a foundation for later science, maybe physical science, right? The effects of gravity on objects. So kind of first recognizing, I think a place to start is recognizing where the opportunities are for STEM thinking, learning, and doing across those age groups, or in this case, these 2 age groups. So what is it and what could it look like? And then again, similarly, not being afraid for there to be some mistakes, right? Not to be afraid if there is a structure that falls down. So, you could see that as a problem, or it could maybe be an opportunity. I wonder about talking to the older child. I wonder why that baby did that. I think it could be an opportunity for discussion among the children, perhaps. But again, there are some people doing some infant toddler work, including folks at the STEMI Center. So I'm hopeful they'll have some more resources to support the youngest learners in the coming years.
Great, thanks. So Emma asked if there are any good resources for teaching kids from different cultural backgrounds.
If there are any resources?
Yes, or ones that you might recommend.
Good question. That's a great question. There definitely work being done for working in science with children who are dual language learners or English language learners. I think there was a presentation a couple days ago on that topic as a part of the STEMIEFest. So there are some people working on that. Apart from, and then the RISE project, out of Boston is a collection of educators, teachers and researchers who are interested in creating science and engineering in particular supports for young children that are grounded in the communities that they live in, the cultures that they come from. So that's another great place. RISE, the RISE Project, is another great group that's working on issues of access to STEM and issues of cultural linguistic diversity.
All right, thanks for those resources. Our next participant has asked, what makes STEM different from science and mathematics, which is traditionally practiced in early childhood education classrooms?
The national K-12 next generation science standards are for science, but they incorporate technology and engineering as well. So you can do engineering. You need to do engineering and engage in the engineering design process with some content. And so the content tends to be science. So you can do engineering with physical science, engineering in earth and space science, engineering in life science, and technology is a product of engineering. So I kind of think of science as, right, it has its own content and practices, but it's also very deeply connected to engineering and technology, right? And then we use mathematics when we do engineering, when we're doing things like measuring the plant height, we're using math, right? So STEM as an acronym gets to use different ways by different people. I think of it personally in both ways, that there are these individual domains, but there are also these wonderfully rich ways in which they are connected, in which you can use one in the service of the other, you can use one to understand the other. And so I think it's not necessarily super different from, math and science, except it's appreciating the ways in which those domains are connected and can be connected.
Okay, great. So our next question is related to how to help parents and teachers who don't know what they are doing related to STEM, how to help them become aware of the STEM around them. And is there a good book that points out the STEM around them, maybe to start that conversation?
Where to start out to support educators and families who aren't necessarily feeling prepared? So many great resources. And I can share a list too. I have a number of places that I like to go to, but I can name a couple that have some nice short video clips that might get you to think about some places to be looking around you. For early math, the Erickson Institute's Early Math Collaborative has a number of nice videos explaining different topics. They tend to be classroom focused, but they're short and kind of clearly connected to what we know about early math. The Dream Network is another great early math resource. I believe it's called the School Readiness Lab, is Daryl Greenfield's group down in Florida, and they're focused on science. Christine Cunningham, I think she's also done some work with STEMI, has done a lot of work in engineering, teaching and learning. So I guess it depends kind of where you're at specifically in terms of what you need, but there really is a lot of great free resources out there to get you started. In terms of specifically STEM in your world, there are a number of great books that talk about STEM more broadly. I'd have to kind of see if there's one specifically for STEM at home, for example, that I would recommend. But there are a number of sites, like I mentioned, that have free content, free videos, and background information as well. With the COVID pandemic, a number of these groups have created family kits. So I know the Dream Network has created at least two family kits. So they're documents that give you tips. For example, one talks about making pizza together and opportunities for math in a family cooking activity. So that's the Dream Network, definitely has some family kits, and I believe Erickson Institute does as well. So I can include a list, in addition to the ones in my PowerPoint, for attendees later on, so I can provide some more of these resources.
Yeah, Alyssa, I think that would be great, because I see a lot of people in the chat that are jumping in and saying, what was this resource again?
Okay.
So I know that you just have this wealth of information. And so I think it'll be really appreciated by all the participants today to kind of have one list that we can refer back to at another point. So if you can get us that list, then we'll work on making that available on the STEMI website then. So thank you. And like I said, people really seem to be liking the resources that you're mentioning. So Lauren asked, as a fairly new children's librarian, how often do you suggest that she practices these STEM ideas with kids? Is it easier to think about these ideas in specific STEM-themed programs or even one-on-one? But with everything I'm already trying to keep in mind when working with kids, it kind of feels overwhelming.
Great question. It's so exciting to have a librarian involved. I have also created a early STEM library program called the Math and Science Storytime series. And it's actually free. We've made it free. If you sign up for our newsletter, you'll get the whole PDF. So that might be a place to start. It's, you can look through there are 8 sessions, each one focused on a different science or math topic. And more science and math as opposed to STEM in that series. But that might be a place to start to see if any of that resonates with you. But I think generally the point that I had made in the recorded presentation about starting with what you're familiar with is a great place to start. So, is there a favorite book you already have, or if you do a story time already, a favorite activity that you do in there? Maybe there's some math that you could infuse in there. Maybe there's an opportunity to count. Is there like I said, a book or an activity? And if there's a favorite theme that you've used, what are some great preschool math or STEM or engineering books that could be connected to what you're already doing? But that would be my advice is you're probably already doing some of this, actually. That's true for a lot of teachers and families and librarians. But there may be a way just to add a little bit more, like the boy with holding the screws in his hand. It may be that you already are doing some kind of makerspace, kind of creative activity. Is there an opportunity to include some number, some geometry, maybe some engineering in what you're already doing?
So, Alyssa, can you just mention the series you're just referring to again that you developed, the librarians, the book series, I think?
Yes, it's the MAST program, MASST. And we have I think I put the link right in the chat.
I just saw it come up on the chat. So perfect. So people can go there. And you also mentioned that if they sign up for your newsletter and updates, that they'll receive the whole packet that way, correct?
Yep.
Okay.
Really available. Yep. All
right. Perfect. So we did have a question. I saw, let me see if I can find it because there was, okay. Can you talk about your work with, and I might not say their last name correctly, so apologies, for Rosemary Geiken in STEM?
Rosemary Geiken, she recently retired from ETSU, but she's done a number of wonderful projects in early childhood science, especially around physical science with the University of Northern Iowa's group at the Regent Center, and their work is on ramps and pathways. If you haven't heard of ramps and pathways, you should check them out. They've done a lot of great programs and research and have books as well. And really, ramps and pathways can be done with any age. I do that kind of work with physical science with teachers, and they have a blast. So Rosemary was involved in that ramps and pathways work. I think Beth Meter, and I saw her name, has also been involved with that work. So if engineering and science and physical science is of interest, that can be a place to start. You don't even, you can use special ramps, but if you're at home, and you're not feeling like getting new equipment, what else could you use as a ramp? And can you just start having conversations about motion and movement of objects? Does something roll or slide? These kinds of things can be done with the youngest kids, right? Even if they're not yet verbal, they can be testing out these ideas. Remember the infants we talked about who are, throwing their bowl of food over the edge of the chair or throwing a ball down off the couch or wherever, whatever they're experimenting with. So Rosemary has done a lot of work with them. And she and I have done some STEM training here at ETSU, and we'll be doing a STEM Institute for preschool educators this summer as well.
Okay, great. I think we have just a couple more minutes left, and I think we've answered all of our Q&A questions. So I'm just going to open it up one last time to see if anyone has any final questions for Alyssa before we wrap things up. And Alyssa, if you have any other comments as well. But one thing I just wanted to say, I really appreciate all the real world applications that you presented with us and really concrete things that we can take and begin doing immediately with the families that we work with or even our own families. I think one thing that really struck me during your presentation as well is that time for us just to kind of step back and think about what our children are bringing to us and check ourselves and say, this is an opportunity, and be open to those opportunities. So for example, your daughter drawing her circle, I can think of about 20 things that happen a day, even with me and my children, that I do not take advantage of those. So thank you for that. Let me see if we have any more questions.
While you're looking, I'll just say it's a great point. I, as a parent, think about that often, and I don't do it right all the time. I can say that it's great to appreciate kids' ideas, but it's just not always the time for it, or you can't always do it. But I think just, once doing this once, where you notice that you could let them test something out, just even if you just do it one time, that might start changing things for you and for your children. And it's a process. It's not, again, just like for kids, it wouldn't, change overnight, but just trying one thing that kind of pushes you outside of your comfort zone, I think can be really powerful. And you can see, oh, it's not that bad,
Yes, just like our kids, we need to be pushed outside of our comfort zone as well. So that's a great point to keep in mind. So it looks like we do not have any more questions at this point, Alyssa, but thank you so much. And I just want to tell everyone, I think this Q&A session was really wonderful and great because we got Alyssa presented us with so many additional resources and things that we can look at that are even freely available during this time. So our STEMI team will work with Alyssa gathering the list of the things she talked about regarding equity, the series that she mentioned, her book, and we'll compile a resource list and then share it with all of the participants so you all have access to that as well. So thank you everyone for joining this session, and Alyssa for presenting all these wonderful ideas. So thank you everyone.
Great, thank you.